the heart of all of this work is the idea that we should have autonomy, that we should be able to make decisions, to have the power and the agency, the decision-making ability to make the choices over our own bodies and our futures, and look at the end of that without violence, without discrimination, without coercion, somebody pushing you on something, and without shame. One of the biggest ways that people try to close each other down on issues of bodies is to shame each other. And sometimes we do that from joking. Sometimes, though, it's much darker, where we do it from hitting, we do it from closing people into a room, right? Not allowing them to go out. There's many, many ways that we physically, mentally, emotionally stop people from freedom, from autonomy of decision-making. So think about that as the first thing that we have to hold. That's our first basket. Because if you look at the yellow section in this screen, and really take time when this goes up online to look at this PowerPoint again, not only is bodily autonomy, the idea that I have the right to make decisions over this body, Noelene, my body, not only is it a human right, it's actually the foundation of all the human rights. And I remember having a discussion with someone maybe 20 years ago now, where she wasn't convinced that what I was saying. She said, oh, I'm so sick of these people who all they do is talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights. All they talk about is bodily autonomy. And at the time, to be honest, there wasn't yet a massive set of work around bodily autonomy. And it used to frustrate me, because precisely for this reason, that I feel like if you can't make a decision over your own body, it's very hard to talk about your right to education, right? It's very hard to talk about your right to health or your right to freedom from violence. All of those things are about the ability to have your own decision-making of your body. Who do I get to have an intimate partner relationship with? Why is that not just my decision? So the minute that you are at an age of consent, and let's be clear on that, that's why we talk about developmental work, is that we are talking about consenting adults, right? But we're also talking about being able to build these concepts all the way from childhood about how do you make good choices? How do you make sure that somebody doesn't violate your right over your body? Because if we're not talking about this, then when we suddenly say to young children, young girls, young boys, young gender non-binary people, be careful, make good choices, they're not able to make those good choices because we aren't even allowing them to think about it. We're not allowing them to discuss it. We're not allowing them to kind of come up with good decision-making frameworks that come from good principles and ethics. So all of these sets of work are connected to the idea that all of your human rights are connected to the idea that you must be able to make good your own decisions over your body without interference from other people, from other institutions, from the state, and from society. Yep. So the next thing to say is that we've got to think then about bodily autonomy, and the next one is what? Integrity. So the idea of autonomy, which is about decision-making, has to be linked to what I said earlier about the state stops at the body. I then have what's called bodily integrity, that this body is mine. I hold all my human rights within this one body. I carry everything that is Noelene in this physical body. So anyone who violates that, including the state, I have to push back and say no. But we all know that that's a perfect state of being, right? And we don't have that. So how is it possible that for a whole half the population of the US right now, that the state and the religious and the men all decided that they should be able to decide for women? They took the decision through the Supreme Court of the US to say you are not allowed to make a decision over your own reproductive capacity, over whether you have an abortion, right to an abortion or not. They took away that entire set of rights like that. They wiped out 50 years worth of work by women. And how did that come to pass? For many reasons, but really it's about the state of the state. Well, how is the state and how is society? And how much do they want to control women? How much do they want to control people who have children? And how is it possible that we got back there after all of these advances? And it's not just about the US. In the Pacific, we have the highest rates of violence against women and girls in the world. We have amongst the worst rates per capita in the world. That's not an accident either, because it's about autonomy, lack of autonomy. People who think they have the right to tell you, one, who you should be, who you should marry, how you should live, who has access to your body, who has access to your earning capacities. All of these things are about taking away our own bodily autonomy and integrity. As women, as gender non-binary people, and sometimes as men. So we just said there's a hierarchy, right? So certain people have more power than others. That's the power of hierarchy, is we are all made and gendered and constructed to be there for other people. But how are we there for ourselves? How do we keep this idea that we have the right to own our own selves, our own bodies, and to stop others from violating those rights? So we've just talked about bodily autonomy and integrity. For the first time ever, we were able to have a World State of the Population report in 2021 that talked about the issue of bodily autonomy and integrity. Second, what we have been able to do is to, on the issue of consent, is to be much more clear on what it means, right? So how do you stop people from taking over the decision-making on your body? You have to be very, very clear on what consent means. And you saw this in Lani's visual representation. One of the most important things is, in order to demonstrate, right, in order to make it real, that you have free, prior, informed consent, because there's lots of people who go, oh no, but they consented to me doing this. How do you know that? Oh, because it was free, prior, and informed. And then you can check that. You can say, actually, did they know what was happening to them and to their body? What would happen? Did they know, was it of their own free will, or did someone force them to do it? And force doesn't have to be direct force, right? It can be that you're coerced to do something, that you're offered something, an incentive. So it has to be free, prior, and informed consent, right? Over your body, on anything. And then what else, though, must consent be? So there's a lot of work that's been done, and you can follow the set of work around consent. There's a lot of it being done around the Stop Rape campaigns, around the Me Too movement. There's a lot of work on sexual and reproductive health and rights, but also there's some wonderful work around the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. CRPD has Article 17, and Article 17 is about protecting the integrity of a person, that every person with disabilities has a right to respect for his or her physical and mental integrity on an equal basis with others. I can't see you, so I'm hoping this is fine. But what we know now in terms of consent is this, right? One, the signal that is sent, so this is all about communication, right? So the signals that are sent in communication between you and others must be clear, So you can't just pretend. You also have to make sure that it's not when someone's drunk and you go, oh, they consented. So it has to be clear. It has to be coherent, easily understood, that you could understand and the other people could understand that consent has been given. Clear communication of it. So clear, coherent, willing, so it can't be forced at all. Subtly or violently, it can't be forced. And what's the last? It has to be ongoing. If at any point consent is withdrawn, then everything stops. So all of this is not just about sex, right? It's not just about sexual behavior, but it is definitely about that, right? When you're a person and you're having sexual contact with another human being, if you are going to have sexual relationships, then you have to be clear that it is clear, coherent, that the messaging is coherent between you, that you're willing to be there, having this sexual relationship, and that the consent keeps going. If at any point one of you goes no way, then all of the action stops straight away. But that is also about other issues to do with sex and reproductive health and rights, and to do with sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, right? So the whole area of life is about consent and whether you have consent in your relationships. Very, very important in economics as well, in ecological justice. Let's work on free, prior, and informed consent in all areas. So that means being very clear that this is not just about sexual behavior. This is about life in general, right? And what we're saying from a feminist human rights frame is free, prior, and informed consent is required anytime that we want to have deeply caring, loving, assertive, democratic relationships with other human beings. And that's a really profound set of work. So I really want to take a moment. Don't worry about the tech, but get these ideas right. Yeah. Free, prior, and informed consent on all areas of life. And again, the last point here is it's about the water drop in the ocean again. And the reason why I say that is free, prior, and informed consent is not consent if the group makes it for you, is it? Because again, it hasn't stopped at your body. You don't have bodily integrity because your father or your uncles or your matangali, your tribal groups are saying on your behalf, we say it is okay. They can't say that. That's why at the heart of the work on sexual assault and on gender-based violence is this idea that everything that we do is based on free, prior, and informed consent. And someone can't give it on the behalf of another. You can have all kinds of relationships socially that allow the society to feel like it is supporting each other, but the minute that you step into the bodily integrity of another human being, then you have taken away their free, prior, and informed consent. That's why if you look at the laws in Fiji now, we can't do mbulu. You can do it in your own traditional settings for other reasons. The practice is still there, but the minute that it is about violating someone's individual rights, the drop of ocean is implicated there, right? The individual human being is implicated there. So both are required, the individual and the collective. So I hope that's really, because I think this is very, very important set of work, because we get these false arguments about, oh, I'm indigenous, so therefore the collective matters. Yes, it does. The collective does matter. And that is a negotiated collective, and it's human. And it has to be just to all that are within that collective. You don't get to practice injustice just because you are in an indigenous collective. Both the water drop matters, as does the ocean. So I hope that's enough on that today, because we don't have a lot of time, but it's absolutely crucial to the work that we do particularly here in the Pacific. It's probably one of the reasons why we're making such poor progress. We are making really poor progress on gender justice and women's human rights. And part of it is because of this. Yeah. Next. So on sexual and reproductive health and rights and accuracy, another problem, which is why we're making such poor progress, is because we get really lazy. As I said before, humans, we get really lazy. So we start saying things like sexual reproductive health, or we say sexual health, or we say reproductive health. We have negotiated since the Cairo conferences as women and as governments all around the world, as societies all around the world, we have said what? Don't pretend that women's only function, that men's only function, that gender non-binary people's only function is to reproduce the human race. People have sexual activity because it is pleasurable to, because it is their right to have sexual contact with other human beings. And that what we have got to be able to do is to say all of it matters. It matters. Sexual rights matter, reproductive rights matter. So we use the language that's called SRHR. It drives me insane that we have done this work for decades, and I still see organizations who call themselves sexual and reproductive health and rights based, who get lazy and start to conflate that language. It is sexual and reproductive health and rights. Sexual and reproductive health and rights. Not one little part of it. And why do I say that? You can see it, right? If we're talking about bodily autonomy and we're talking about integrity, we have to be able to draw the line at the body. That means that the human being is enabled to make choices about their sexuality, choices about their reproductive rights, and about their health. All of these things matter. It's clear, logical. But because, and this happens not just because we're lazy, this also happens because some of us don't want us to have the freedom. What do we say again, like Lani says? Freedom on all of our territories. That means to make the choices about our sexuality as well. That's why we still find it hard to get the work on sexual rights, because they want to reduce everybody, humans, to just what it is you do about reproducing. You are not that, I am not that. We are much more. And we are all of the choices as well about reproductive health and about sexual health. We are everything and more. And that means if we're making our choice of a partner, whether it's a sexual partner, whether it's a partner for life, whether it's about marriage or not, in the traditional sense of marriage, whether it is to have a long-term relationship with someone that is even a friend. All of these things are personal decisions. And they are about different kinds of decision making. So we really, really have to get this right. And that's why I spend so much time. When we do these sessions, it's not just saying, okay, everybody make sure that you respect the rights of LGBTQI people. No, it's about understanding bodily autonomy. It's about understanding bodily integrity. It's about understanding sexual and reproductive health and rights. So that when we're communicating with each other, we're communicating from evidence and from facts, and we are not going to harm each other because we're doing it in a way that is respectful and healthy and loving. And that everybody has sexual and reproductive health and rights concerns. Doesn't matter what body you're in. You have concerns about your sexuality, you have concerns about your reproductive health, and you have concerns about the human rights related to those. And we should never allow someone to take away some of those rights just because they don't want to speak about us as a sexual being. We are all sexual beings. Yeah. Okay, next. And again, it is about this. It's about stopping from just seeing all of us at the service of one set of bodies on the planet and being part of an ecosystem that is about care and well-being and health and love. because then you will treat other human beings and other species in a different way. And we don't end up with 5 planetary boundaries already crossed like we have right now. We've got under a decade. Some people are saying half a decade to reverse all of this poor work that we're doing on socioeconomic and ecological justice. So what's the tools that we require, right? Well, we've already done this work in a general sense, but now we're really going to hone in, okay? So remember we talked about the coin model, and we said any social structure can produce and reproduce greater or less equality, right? Some people come out with a lot more privilege and some with a lot less privilege and more oppression. We're clear on that, I think. So this is the first one, which is about the coin, right? It produces, any system can produce inequality, where some have privilege and some have oppression. So what are the examples of that? Let's go to the next slide. Obviously, the examples are whether you are from a socioeconomic class, as we've said, whether you are able-bodied or disabled, a person with a disability, whether you are straight, as they say, heteronormative, or whether you're non-straight. And there's many ways you might express that, you know, lesbian, bisexual, trans, there's many. Whether you are cis or trans, and we will talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Whether you are white and non-white and racialized, and there is a system that kicks in that is racist, that says not just that you are white or Caucasian or from Europe, but that if you are white, then therefore you are this, you are that, you are better, you have, you know, you have more rights than other people who are brown or black or indigenous. So those systems produce more privilege for some and more oppression for others. We're all clear. But this system allows us to name that a bit better in our lives. Okay. And then those wonderful, next slide, the wonderful women, including Professor Kimberly Crenshaw from the African American movement, they went ahead because, you know, they're living in a system that has done this, that's taken it to an extreme over the last few hundreds of years in the US. And they're having to live in a system that said very clearly to them, because of your color, your racial background, because of you come from a slave background, you know, because of many of these issues, you are not as good as us who are not like that. So they came up with a framework, a lens. Again, remember what we said about, it's almost like you having a cataract taken off your eyes and you see the world in a different way. And the intersectionality lens is, what it says is, you are everything in this circle and it all comes together, right? You have a particular racialized quality. You are called something. And one of the big fights that's going on in the Pacific right now is obviously around the Melanesian, Polynesian, and Micronesian leadership, right? And one of the crazy things about that is those categories, they're actually only from the 1800s. And they were put together by a French colonial set of rulers who categorized Pacific people into those. So now we're fighting over something that wasn't even ours. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific didn't have Polynesian, Melanesian, Micronesian. That was an imposed system. So now we're fighting over something that wasn't even ours. So that's an interesting thing, because the same thing we can say on many, many fronts. In what ways do we have privilege or oppression because of what color we are, the ethnicity we have, our gender identity, our sexual orientation, our mental health, our age, our education, and look at number 12, our attractiveness. All of those things are created systems that say that certain kinds of hair are better than other kinds of hair. It's ridiculous. That say that certain kinds of faces are better than other kinds of faces. Why? Who decided? All of these things are ways that we remove each other, but also that we take away people's autonomy and people's integrity to protect themselves from pain, from transphobia, from gender inequality, from violence, from ableism, from racism, all those things. So let's go to definitions, right? So let's just go to one part of this, one section of this. If we look at the issue of sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, one of the things that we have to do is be very, very clear, next slide, on the definitions. And it's very hard for us to do that in a way that, you know, if people aren't used to listening to some of this and they go, oh my God, it's too long, that acronym is too long, I just don't want to know. But it's the same with any other. This is what we keep saying through all of these lovely free schools, the time to share with each other. You take the time, you learn it over time. Over time, it starts to flow off your tongue. So let's start at the bottom. We'll go reverse. Let's start with sex characteristics. Yeah. So our sex characteristics actually, that's why I put up this gingerbread man, and this is used a lot in workshops, and I like it because people, you can even use it with, both children and adults, and it's a good introduction. But the problem with the gingerbread man is it's not just about what your genitals are, right? Your sex characteristics are also about your hormones. They're also about your genetic coding. Whether you have an XY or an XXY, whether you have certain chromosome combinations, right? It is about your genitalia, but it's about saying that sometimes in one out of, and the statistics that we have right now, and those who work on the area of, intersex human rights, that is changing all the time. We learn more and more about intersex human rights all the time. If you look at sex characteristics, when a baby's born, let's say a baby's born, and when they're born, wherever it is they're born, in 1 out of 1,000 of those bodies, it's not clear whether it is male or female. There is a wonderful spectrum. Just like in nature, there is a wonderful spectrum. So it might be, for instance, that there is a micro penis, a very small penis, but it might also be that you have both a penis and you have the reproductive organs that would normally be in a female body, right? So you can have cross as well. So all of these sets of sex, what we call sex characteristics, happen when a body is born, when a child is born. But what happens is we very quickly try and I put this in quotes, we try and correct it. Many doctors just go straight and they start to correct it with the parents. What intersex human rights activists are saying is wait until that little person can tell you who they are, so that any shifts that need to be made medically, they are made in consultation with bodily autonomy and bodily integrity. That's why the work of bodily autonomy and integrity is so important to intersex human rights work, right? So you can wait a little longer and you can work those things out with the person whose issue it is. They will tell you, let's do it together or leave me alone as I am, right? So that sex characteristics is where you are biologically sitting, and then we will move to the next, right? So I'm going to take you back up to the top now. I'm going to take you actually to sexual orientation. And the reason why I do this is, let's go to the very beginnings, which is biology. And then let's go to sexual orientation, which is very, very easy to do. We just say sexual orientation is the way that you are oriented to someone. And it's not just about sexual behavior. It is about love and affection and care and where your primary emotional attachment is. So that's why some of us are doing some work to kind of think through, it's not only about sexual orientation, it is about orientation of your affective capacities. Who do I most love and care about in this world? Is it the bodies that are like my own? Is it the bodies that are not like mine? Where is it on the spectrum that I am attracted? Yeah. So sexual orientation, a lot more work being done on sexual orientation. And then we move to gender identity, which on the gingerbread man, one of the ways to say it is, it's who I am inside, it's my identity, it's who I am, right? So when I speak to you with my pronoun, when I say to you, I am Noelene and I am she, her, it is my bodily and autonomy and integrity. I am telling you I am she, her. That is my gender identity. When somebody else does it and theirs is he, then that is who they are. They are he. And sometimes if our gender identity doesn't appear to match up with what people think our sex characteristics are, then that is where we start to get a lot of the oppression. The privileges and oppressions kick in then, because the further that you are away from what society thinks a quote unquote man should look like or a woman should look like, when you are moving away from that, then you get more and more violence and discrimination, don't you? And we all know that. You and I can see that. We live it ourselves, but also we see it in our families, in our organizations, in our societies, all around the world. And we have to be really, really clear about this. Because what does it do? We start to build up our, this is again where we have to talk about the drop in the ocean. We start to build these institutions that say that only if you are a woman like that, then you are not only a woman, but you're a good woman. You're a woman that's moral. You're a woman that can come and claim these rights because you're that kind of woman. But what if you are not? What if you are another kind of woman? Because of all of these things, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, your expression, and your sex characteristics. Suddenly you're not allowed to have the job that you want. You're not allowed to have the health care that you require. You're not allowed to have the education. You're not allowed to have a happy and loving family, adopt. All of these things you're not allowed. Because again, someone is violating your bodily autonomy and integrity. They're saying only if you are like this, you matter. If you are like this, all these other, you don't matter. And that's why this comes to the heart of universality of human rights and the heart of gender justice. And then the last one I wanted to explain is around gender expression. As Lani said, if you already think that certain characteristics are normal and are good, then anyone who doesn't look like that, then you make these kinds of judgments, right? They walk down the street in front of you and you already have an opinion. And you don't just have an opinion, you think that it is your right then to violate, to discriminate, to exclude, to stigmatize. Or you can make the other choice and you can say, I will work for inclusion and I will work for diversity and I will love all of this beautiful complexity that is evidence-based, that shows us this is how the world really is and this is how the human species really is. And that changes it then, right? It changes everything. Because what it means is that no longer are you just conforming to a little box, but you're saying, how do we create a society that is for all, that is just for all? So this is the real set of work that is both the most difficult, but we think also the most beautiful, because it's about making real the idea that we all have a right to have all our human rights respected. And let's be clear, right? Everybody on this planet has a sexual orientation. Everybody on this planet has gender identity. Everybody on this planet has gender expression. Everyone has sex characteristics. And so this work is not just about LGBTQI people. This work is all of us. And to be honest, a lot of us, we come out late about what our real sexual orientation is, or our real gender identity, whatever that is. We come out and are freer about it later because we're afraid. We're afraid of all the consequences that happen when you have a world that isn't inclusive, that doesn't allow us to live the life that we really are, that does everything it can to close us down. In the communities here in Fiji and across the Pacific, we're dealing with people who literally are killed for this situation. Around the world, we still have 70 countries around the world that criminalize people on the basis of their sexual orientation, but also their gender identity. How ridiculous that it's 2022 and we're still talking about this. We still have 6 in the Pacific. One of the greatest sets of human rights work right now is to get rid of those old archaic laws. You know what's the most crazy about it? A lot of them come from old colonial laws. And those old colonial laws, they're all gone from the ones who brought them here. The UK, the US, Dutch, Netherlands, all of them, they've taken out those old sodomy provisions, all of these ridiculous laws that they had, gone. But they've left them wherever they went around the planet. All this coloniality and the imperialism, they scattered all of this nonsense around the world, where we actually had many, many wonderful ideas about sexuality and gender that were a lot more free and opening. All these wonderful terms, whakawhine, you know, many other terms around the Pacific. Put them into takatapui. There's many, I think we've got some in our glossary as well. Many indigenous and local identities that are on the spectrum, right? And yet we allowed ourselves to go with what was the imperialist colonial forms, in their worst forms, in their most judgmental forms. Yeah. So part of our work is to get rid of those. Because the reality, the next slide, is that it's very easy. We live in a world that shows us the answers. People laugh when I do this slide, but it actually really gets through to people. We do this in universities, we do it with police, we do it in prisons, we do these workshops wherever we can do them. And one of it is about saying, you know, these wonderful ginger flowers that have so many petals that are all part of the same flower, that's you. Every petal on your flower is unique, all part of you. So if all you look at is 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 petals, and that's all the ones that are about SOGIESC, for instance, but you forget all of the others, then you're not getting to the wholeness of who that person is. You're not respecting their bodily autonomy and integrity. You're not relating to the whole person. You're just looking at those bits that are about your prejudice, not about them at all, but about your prejudice, and allowing that to be their reality because you choose to discriminate, right? So what should we do? It's so clear and simple. Next slide. Become aware of your own SOGIESC. Know what your sexual orientation is. And to be honest, that changes over time, right? There are explorations that happen through our childhood, into our youth, into our adult life. We're still learning all the time about what that is. Recognize it and learn about your own sexual orientation, your own gender identity, your own gender expression, and your own sex characteristics. And then also work out how you can be an active ally or accomplice. You might just not do it yourself anymore. Don't be homophobic and transphobic. You might help others not to be that way. When you hear someone making a terrible joke, it's as simple as closing that down right then and there and saying, please, that's not something that we do in this household or in this Yangona group or in this, you know, you have a choice on how you respond. And be that accomplice for people who sit beyond the spectrum of what society wants to say is normal and good and right. Because everybody, ultimately in feminism, we talk about a thing called the golden apple. Everybody is good and wonderful and right. And then we negotiate. We start from the core and then we negotiate on all the other issues.